Hello, and welcome back to Off the Deaton Path. I'm your host, Stan Deaton, with the Georgia Historical Society, and we welcome you to this podcast for the week of March 12th, 2026. We are coming to you this week from the legal division here at the Georgia Historical Society in our ongoing commemoration of the US 250 and in conjunction with our Georgia History Festival theme this year of A Nation of Laws, Courts and the Foundation of Freedom. My very special guest today is former Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Larry Thompson, who joins me to talk about his recently published memoir. As you will hear, Larry Thompson is a native of Hannibal, Missouri. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from Culver Stockton College in Canton, Missouri, his master's degree at Michigan State University, and his law degree at the University of Michigan. He has been a member of the Georgia Bar since 1978. Larry served as United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia from 1982 to 1986. From 1995 to 98, he served as independent counsel for the Department of Housing and Urban Development Investigation. He was a partner with the Atlanta-based law firm of King & Spalding, LLP, and was co-founder of the firm's Special Matters in Government Investigations practice. In 2001, Larry was confirmed by the United States Senate as Deputy Attorney General of the United States, the second highest ranking position in the Department of Justice. He served from 2001 to 2003. As Deputy Attorney General John Ashcroft named Larry in 2002 to lead the Department of Justice's National Security Coordination Council. Also in 2002, President George W. Bush named Larry to head the government-wide Corporate Fraud Task Force. In 2004, Larry served as a senior fellow with the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. He also served as general counsel and senior vice president for government affairs of PepsiCo Incorporated. Larry has served on the University of Georgia's School of Law's faculty as the holder of the John A. Sibley Chair of Corporate and Business Law since 2011. He is currently a member of the faculty division of the law school's Dean Rusk International Law Center Council. Larry also joined Finch McCraney, LLP, as counsel in July 2015. He has received numerous awards for his professional achievements, including the Edmund Jennings Randolph Award for outstanding contributions to the accomplishment of the Department of Justice's mission, the Outstanding Litigator Award from the Federal Bar Association, and an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Pace University in New York. Larry has also been recognized by Atlanta's Gate City Bar Association as a member of its Hall of Fame. I got to know Larry Thompson through his service on the Board of Curators of the Georgia Historical Society, where he currently serves as treasurer. He is here today to talk with me about his recently published memoir, Quiet Counsel, looking back on a life of service to the law, published by Disruption Books on November 19th, 2024. My conversation with Larry Thompson begins now. Larry Thompson, welcome to our podcast.
Good to be with you. Good to be here.
So you have written a memoir called Quiet Counsel, where you look back on your, the subtitle, looking back on a life of service to the law, which has been extensive. You were, of course, Deputy Attorney General of the United States and in the administration of President George W. Bush. We're going to talk about that. But first of all, why did you feel the need at this point in your life to write your memoir?
Well, that's a good question, Stan. And I've often thought about, why do you write a book like this? And in thinking about it, and I get asked this question all the time. Mm-hmm. And in thinking about it, I'd like to think that it's not a vanity project. And I've had this kind of an unusual career. I've practiced law for 52 years now, and I've had nothing has been planned, but I've had these three buckets of activity in my career, which is sort of unusual for lawyers of my time, at least. I've been in public service, I've been in private practice, and I've been the general counsel of a large public company. And I thought that trying to understand what I have learned from these 52 years of practicing law, and at the time I started writing the book, it was 48 years of practicing law, might be helpful. I was guided by a quote from one of my favorite attorney generals, Robert Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And General Jackson said some time ago that it's not the duty of government to keep we citizens from falling into error. It's the duty of citizens to keep the government from falling into error. And I thought that if I could impart some of the things that I've dealt with during the course of my career to others, it might be helpful. I tried not to make the book about me per se, but about the important policy issues that I've had to deal with over my now 52-year legal career.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a long way of saying that I really tried to make the book helpful to future generations and not to make it strictly about me.
Take us back to the beginning. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Hannibal, Missouri. I had very good parents. Neither of my parents had a high school education, but they were very, very good people. My mother was a cook and a housewife part-time. My dad worked on the railroad, and they were very, very good people. I like to point out an example of how good they were. I didn't know that I was so-called disadvantaged until I went to college. And I don't remember what class it was. It could have been a sociology class or it could have been an economics class. But the teacher was going through the concept of social stratification. And you had the upper class and the wealthy class and the upper class and the middle class and the working poor. And then she got to the disadvantaged. And I started looking at some of the criteria of the disadvantaged class. And I said to myself, oh, that's where I am. But that was the first time in my life, and I'm now a sophomore in college, that I ever considered myself disadvantaged. I had good parents, and they always stressed that we get an education, do the right thing, and stay out of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a great deal of respect for their friends. It's a small town. Hannibal's a small town, 18,000 people in Northeast Missouri, about 1,000 Black people. So because it's such a small town, I had all kinds of friends. My parents had all kinds of friends. And I can remember my dad worked on the railroad, and it was during the times of some financial uncertainty in the country. And he would be laid off from the railroad from time to time. And then all of a sudden, some of the dentists and doctors in Hannibal would call my dad and ask if he wanted to come out and clean their offices.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have a regular job doing that, but the word got out that Ezra, that's my dad's name, had been laid off. And so people reached out to us to help us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of the background for my early life. And as I said in the book, I got lucky and I picked the right parents.
What year were you born, Larry?
1945.
So you make the point of saying this in your book. You did attend segregated schools in Missouri.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
I attended segregated schools through the 8th grade.
Mm.
For the most part, segregated by law. I think toward the end of my time in elementary school, the Brown decision had come down, but from a practical standpoint, it hadn't been enforced in Missouri yet.
I see. How did you always want to go to college? Was that something that your parents told you that you could do? There was never any doubt about that. And how did you choose where you wanted to go?
They stressed not necessarily that I go to college, but that we get as much education as we could. Stan, I was lucky. I think a lot of us are lucky, and we're given all kinds of different benefits, and I was a good student. And so in the transition from Douglas School, which was the segregated school I attended, to Hannibal Junior High School, which combined all the elementary schools at the time into one junior high school. And I was in the ninth grade then. I was a good student. And when I transitioned, my teachers at Hannibal Junior High School soon realized that I was a good student, and they were very supportive of me. My classmates, partly because I was a good student and partly because at that time I was a halfway decent athlete, they were very supportive of me. So you have this kind of like a bucolic small town environment, and perhaps all the problems of the time were masked in Hannibal, Missouri, especially the racial problems and the class problems. But that was my environment. So it's important to understand, I guess, in terms of my background, that the transition from a segregated school to integration, I don't want to say it was smooth, but it really went without any big incidents. And the teachers and my classmates were very, not only friendly, but supportive of me.
Mm-hmm. Did you graduate in 1963?
Yes.
I'm guessing that.
I
Okay.
graduated in 1963, and I was the president of my class.
Really?
Yes.
And in an integrated school?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Was that based on popularity? Was it based on academics, or as you said, were you the best player on the football or basketball team? How did you achieve that?
Well, I don't know. I don't know why they voted for me, but I'm sure some of this was, in fact, maybe all of this was popularity. But I stayed friends with my class. I've stayed friends with my classmates for a number of years. Unfortunately, many of us are no longer around. But I don't know why. It was just like like.
But you were voted. I mean,
I
you were
was
not.
voted. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, where did you go to undergraduate?
Well, that's an interesting question. I went to a small school, only about 35 miles north of Hannibal. It's called Culver Stockton College. It's a school that was founded by the Disciples of Christ, which is the largest Disciple of Christ school is Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa is another one.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to grow up in the Disciples of Christ church. But I mentioned to you earlier that I was a football player. And at some point, I thought, well, maybe I'm good enough to play at the University of Missouri. That would have been neat, the University of Missouri Tigers. And they had a very good football team at the time. And my coach arranged for me to go to Columbia, Missouri, to meet Dan Devine, who was the coach of the Missouri Tigers, who went on to be the coach at Notre Dame. And I could tell that Coach Devine had not looked at my film that my coach had sent him. And my film was pretty good. I was a pretty good high school player. I had a lot of spirit. I understood football. He just looked at me, and he looked me up and down, and basically he could see that I wasn't big enough to play at the University of Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And Stan, I wanted to play football. And so I immediately thought about Culver Stockton. There were some Culver alums in Hannibal who encouraged me to look at Culver Stockton. Culver Stockton had a small football program. I guess it would be in today's terms equivalent to Division III, as opposed to Division I, and that's where I decided to go. And looking back, it was one of the most fortuitous decisions that I made because it was a small liberal arts college. They focused on being a liberal arts college, and today it still remains basically a liberal arts college. And I think for a person of my background and interest, it was the right thing for me to do.
What did you major in?
I majored in sociology and minored in history. Uh, no, not thinking I could ever be like Dr. Stan Deaton. And I was a child of the 60s. I really didn't aspire to be a sociologist. I wanted to be a social worker.
Mm.
And I thought that would be an interesting field. And in fact, I asked one of my history professors, John Sperry, who was a terrific, one of the best teachers I've had in the various stages of my educational life. I asked Professor Sperry to write a letter of recommendation for me to for an intern program at the Washington University School of Social Work in St. Louis. Mm. And after class one day, Professor Sperry looks at me and says, "Mr. Thompson, will you come up front?" And he said to me, "I got your request and I've written the letter. And I think you would be an excellent social worker. But have you considered law?" Well, I had never considered law. It's not anything that had ever entered my mind. You know, I'm from a small town. There were some lawyers in Hannibal that I knew, but they basically, represented drunks, people who were in trouble. Mm-hmm. And it's not anything I wanted to do. I didn't know anything about the business aspects of law and lawyers representing businesses or lawyers doing complex trust and estate planning. We had those lawyers in Hannibal, but I didn't know them. My family didn't know them. And I said, no, I had not considered being a lawyer. And then I went to visit the faculty representative who was in charge of the pre-law program at Culver Stockton and started basically adjusting my schedule to take pre-law classes, like accounting and philosophy and some English literature classes. And so I don't know if I would have ever become a lawyer without that encounter with Professor Sperry. And I don't know whether I would have had a similar encounter at the University of Missouri, which was 30,000 students at the time. I was in high school, and Culver Stockton was less than 1,000 students. Who knows what would have happened? I'd like to think it would have been a much more difficult time at the University of Missouri to have that kind of personal encounter than it was at Culver Stockton College.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt. And that was one of those moments in your life that really you pivoted. It really set you on the path. It was one of
what I would consider, and you only have a few, as you know, but it certainly was one of the signal moments of my life, not just career, but my life.
Yeah. So you chose to go to, I don't know if you applied anywhere else, but you wound up at the University of Michigan Law School. Is that correct?
Well, that was for my law degree. But again, recognizing the time that I grew up. So in this, I'm graduated from college in 1967. And if you applied to law school in 67 and you were accepted, you did not get a deferment from the draft. This was at the height of the Vietnam War.
Sure.
And so the only way to get a deferment was to go to graduate school and get a teaching fellowship. And then you could get a deferment, and it was classified like a regular teacher, an educational deferment. And so again, Professor Sperry comes in, and I was a good student, and he encouraged me to apply for a Woodrow Wilson fellowship at Columbia University. I was invited to New York to interview for the fellowship. I thought the interviews went really well, but I was struck by how different New York City was than Hannibal, Missouri, or Canton, Missouri, where Culver Stockton was located, which was a city even smaller than Hannibal. And there had just been a riot, a disturbance, Columbia's on the west side of New York, close to Harlem. It was dramatically different. I knew that Columbia was considered an Ivy League school. I knew that it was a good school, but I still didn't appreciate the significance because of my background. Midwestern, small town. I didn't appreciate the significance of going to a school like Columbia versus, say, a state school. And I just made a decision that I did not want to live in New York City at that stage of my life. I saw a poster at Culver Stockton College, different graduate school opportunities, and there was a poster that advertised a graduate fellowship, research fellowship, teaching assistantship at Michigan State University. And at that time, Michigan State University had the best football team in the country, along with Notre Dame, Bubba Smith and all those guys. It was a class. And I took a trip to East Lansing. And Stan, I don't know if you've ever visited East Lansing, Michigan, but Michigan State is an agricultural school. It's a pastoral campus, beautiful, expansive campus. All, the agricultural schools there. And I just thought it was a beautiful place. And so I made the decision to attend Michigan State and not attend Columbia University. Again, looking back, how many students make a decision like that? But you're a creature, or you're a function of your background, and that's where my background said I should attend. And I met my wife at Michigan State University, so that was a very good, fortuitous decision.
Yeah, and I said you went to University of Michigan. My apologies. That is absolutely not Michigan State. Those are different places entirely.
And I eventually did go to the University of Michigan Law School.
But
right. That's
yeah. So you went to Michigan State, and you were in graduate school, and you got your deferment.
I got my deferment, and eventually I joined the Navy OCS, Officer Candidate School, and then the Vietnam War, and that sort of kept me from being drafted into the Vietnam War, and that kept me instead until the war ended. I took a job after Michigan State at Ford Motor Company in labor and industrial relations. I had a professor there who knew that I was interested in going to law school, but he encouraged me to try the corporate world. I took the job at Ford. I was a low-level labor relations executive in a big assembly plant in Highland Park, Michigan. It was a very tough job. And after about 3 months there, I ended up staying a little bit over a year. But after about 3 months there, I knew that I needed to apply to law school. So I applied to various schools, all in the Midwest, and was accepted into the University of Michigan, and that's where I went.
And you mentioned in a speech that you gave, which is printed here in your book in one of your appendices, your mentors, people who, of course, John Sperry was not mentioned, so I'm glad that you talked about him just then. But you mentioned one of your law professors who was instrumental, named Joe Vining. So Larry goes to University of Michigan Law School, and you were struggling a little bit, I think, at the beginning.
I was struggling in the sense that I wasn't at the top of my class.
Yeah.
And but again, the point I want to make is that I could compete, and in Michigan at the time was one of the top 5 law schools. It has slipped. It's in the top 10. But at the time, it was one of the top 5 law schools in the country. Students came from all the Ivy League schools and all the very, very top elite schools around the country. And I'd come from this Midwestern liberal arts college that nobody at Michigan had ever heard of. They'd heard of Michigan State, of course. But, I did fine, but I was struggling in the sense that I wanted to do better. and I took a class with Professor Vining, and it's like two minds meeting and finding common ground. And he ignited a spark in me in terms of legal education. We became friends, and we remain friends. He has some health problems now, but we remain friends until to this day and correspond frequently. He really got me interested in two aspects of the law: corporate law and criminal law, and the convergence of corporate criminal law. And it's remarkable to look back. A good part of my career has dealt with both aspects of those things that I was introduced to by Professor Vining. And he has always been very encouraging to me, very supportive of me. And again, one of the signal events of my career was meeting someone like that.
And I don't want to belate because we want to move on to other people. But what did he say to you? You said you hadn't made the law review. You were, as you say, you were not at the top of the class. So, but he saw something. He saw something in you.
I don't know what he saw, but I remember his wife was Alice, and I spent some time with him, and I remember being invited over to his home with a couple of other students.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of said, well, this has been interesting. I sort of was putting myself down and sort of putting myself down to the point where I said, well, I don't know what kind of lawyer I'm going to be because I just have average grades, something to that effect. I don't remember exactly, but I remember Professor Vining looking at me and saying, don't ever talk like that. I have graded your papers. You've taken 2 classes from me, and you are an excellent student. Don't sell yourself short. And so, boy, that was sort of what I kind of needed to hear from someone like Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And again,
right words at the right time.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, and you'll correct me here check me at any point in which I get this chronology wrong. You graduate from law school, and I know that you were working, I think, at a firm in Missouri. Do I have that correct? When you
Yes.
met another one of your mentors, or someone who strongly urged you to take a job somewhere else. Tell that story.
Excuse me. So I wanted to practice law in Missouri. That was my home state.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed with a couple of law firms in St. Louis. Interestingly enough, Stan, now we're talking about 1973, 74. Interestingly enough, we still had the vestiges of some problems in our country. I remember distinctly, and I'm not going to mention the law firm, where I interviewed with that law firm and did not get a job offer. Michigan at that time, everybody knew where everybody else was in terms of grading. And so one of my Caucasian counterparts, who was also from St. Louis, got a job at that firm. We had the same grades. And so I always think about that. But I did get an offer from another St. Louis firm. And also Monsanto had a general counsel who was, looking to change the dynamics of the in-house corporate law department. And what he wanted to do was recruit some good students to Monsanto right out of law school. Typically, you go into an in-house department from a law firm after you've practiced for some time. He wanted to change that dynamic and then have young people come into the law department and then ship them out to a law firm for a period of years and then bring them back to Monsanto. And so I was hired at Monsanto, and another young man was hired at Monsanto, and his name was Clarence Thomas. He came from Yale University. And Clarence and I have been friends ever since. He was in the Missouri Attorney General's office briefly and then came to Monsanto. I was at Monsanto first. And again, the importance of friendship, and one of the things I advise young people to do is to stay close not only to your teachers, but stay close with your friends in life. And you're going to learn a lot from your friends. And Clarence and I would have a almost weekly lunch at a little Chinese restaurant close to Monsanto's offices. And at some point, I said to him, "Well, Michigan's a very good law school, but I didn't go to any of the Ivy League law schools." And he basically, with his baritone voice, "Don't ever sell yourself short. I know a lot of students from all these schools, and you're just as good, if not better, lawyer than they are."
Mm.
And I've told this to Clarence to his face a number of times. I really think about that often. I thank him for giving me that support and counsel, but I think about it often, how important it was to me at that stage of my life and career, how important it was for me to have that mindset early on in my career.
Mm-hmm. And he encouraged you to take a job or at least go do an interview with a firm in Atlanta called King and Spalding. Is that right?
What happened there briefly was that there was some litigation at Monsanto, and it was in Dalton, Georgia, and the company decided to retain King and Spalding. And I was the designated in-house lawyer to coordinate things with the outside firm. I, at that point, had decided I really wanted to do litigation and not stay in corporate law. And the firm in St. Louis that had originally offered me a job said, "Well, you can leave Monsanto and come to work for us." When I told this to King and Spalding, they said, "Well, we didn't know you were thinking about leaving. Monsanto is the client. We don't want to steal somebody from our client. But if you're thinking about leaving anyway, you need to come work with us." I really didn't take that seriously. But again, at one of our lunches, Clarence basically said, "Atlanta is booming, and it would be a great place to go practice law." And I distinctly remember the population at the time. The population of metropolitan St. Louis and Atlanta, they were about the same, about 2.5 million people. Today, St. Louis is about 2.5 million people. And I think the population of Metro Atlanta is approaching 7 million.
Mm.
So that was a very fortuitous
Mm-hmm.
decision that worked out well for me.
And you go to King and Spalding, and you met another, probably most influential of your
Yes,
mentors, a fellow from South Georgia named Griffin Bell.
from Americus, Georgia.
From Americas, I beg your pardon. What I don't know. What did I say?
Well, it's Southwest Georgia.
Yeah, Southwest Georgia. Yeah. So Griffin Bell becomes really the most important person in your legal life, probably. How would you describe your relationship with him and what he did for you?
Without a question, he is the most important person in my legal life and career. He was a giant. And again, I want to stress that none of this was planned. I didn't know that Judge Bell had been at King and Spalding. I knew he was the Attorney General of the United States at the time under President Carter. But when I joined the firm in '77, he was still Attorney General, but on the way back to Atlanta and on the way back to the firm. And I got some initial assignments, working for him and on his cases, and working with lawyers who were more senior lawyers than myself who were on his cases. And I got to know him. I got to have enormous respect for Judge Bell because not only was he very smart, very experienced lawyer, he really understood how to solve clients' legal problems. And he stressed that was the job of lawyers, not to necessarily obliterate your opponent. That's not your job. Your job is to solve the client's legal problems, and that involves a whole range of different things. Sometimes you have to go to trial and have and litigate a case, but there are other ways that you can solve these problems. And so I learned a lot from him. He again was a friend and was very supportive. I also, at the time, and one of the things I like to stress in this book is that my career has been a crazy mix of doing pure legal work, policy work, and politics. And there's nothing wrong with politics. And I encourage young people, especially lawyers, because I like to say law is the mother's milk of politics. I encourage lawyers to get involved in politics on Democratic side, Republican side, different ideological spectrums. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I was involved in Republican politics. In Missouri, I campaigned for Jack Danforth to be the Attorney General of Missouri, the first Republican elected statewide in Missouri. And when I moved to Atlanta, even though King and Spalding was known as the law firm of Jimmy Carter, I got involved in Georgia politics, and I got involved with a gentleman by the name of Mac Mattingly, who was running for Senate. He had a long shot against Herman Talmadge. And in the 1980 election, where Reagan swept everything, Mac won the Georgia Senate race. And I was on the selection committee for the judges and U.S. attorneys in the state of Georgia. And I'd worked with a man by the name of Earl Phillips. And I was a young lawyer. My goal was to try to become a partner, make partner as we called it, at King and Spalding. And I wasn't interested in a political appointment. So the committee selected two different individuals to be the U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Georgia, which was in Atlanta. And things didn't work out for either of those. The newspaper in Atlanta was beginning to criticize the Reagan administration and Senator Mattingly for not having a presidentially appointed U.S. attorney. And one day, Judge Bell comes into my office and said, I was meeting with Earl Phillips, who was one of the founders of the now national law firm of Fisher and Phillips. And we decided that you should become the United States Attorney in the Northern District of Georgia. I didn't apply for the job. I didn't know if I really wanted the job. And I kind of thought initially that this was a nice way for Judge Bell to break the news to me that I wasn't going to make partner at King Spalding. And we talked about it. I now realize that, again, we talk about the signal events in your career. This was one of the signal events in my career. And I decided to pursue that position. And it has meant everything to me. And again, this is all directly, not indirectly, directly attributable to Griffin Bell.
And I think, again, you will check me along the way. I think it's because of your service there that you received a phone call. I think it was in January 2001 after George W. Bush won the presidency in 2000. I don't know if you were still working in that position or if you'd gone back to King and Spalding, but you got a phone call.
I got a phone call. I'd gone back to King and Spalding in '86. And along with Judge Bell, we established what we called then the Special Matters and Government Investigations team in a big law firm. We were the first large law firm in Atlanta to basically have a white-collar criminal practice. And my practice was thriving. And so I started in '86, and now we're at 2001. I had been, I'd had a lot of, I was very busy, and I'd had some dealings with the Bush campaign, especially the litigation in Florida involving the Chads. And I really hadn't done much work myself, but I'd had a couple of associates who had worked with me do some legal research for the team in Florida, and reporting that our work to Ted Olson, who became the Solicitor General under President Bush. And I get a call on New Year's Day from Governor Bush, President-elect Bush, asking me to serve on his team and to serve as Deputy Attorney General. He says, "I know you need to talk to your wife. Will you give me a call back tomorrow morning?" And that's what happened.
And you, and how long did it take you to say yes? Because
I had to talk to Brenda,
uh-huh,
my wife, but it was something that I felt like I could not say no to. You have the President of the United States asking you to do something that's important. I have to tell you, though, and remind you, Stan, I was 55 at the time, and taking that job would be a substantial 90%, almost 90% pay cut.
That was my next question. Yeah.
And so that it did require some reflection, but it's something I felt I really needed to do, had to do. And there was obviously, I knew this, there was obviously risk involved. But as I look back, and as I remind young people now, I'm in a position to do that. I bet on myself. And I think that's what we all should do at the end of the day, as we go through life and make decisions about our careers. Bet on yourself. Nobody else is. You need to bet on yourself.
And you were the second African American to serve as Deputy Attorney General. We talked about this. You mentioned that Eric Holder had held that position before you, but you were serving under John Ashcroft. Did you know him before you took that position?
I did not know John personally, but Clarence, Justice Thomas, had worked with John in the Missouri Attorney General's office. They knew each other, and of course, I met with John. He wanted to meet with me, and we're both from Missouri. We had a lot in common, believe it or not. And he remains. We had a terrific time together, and he remains a friend to this day.
You were in office you had been, obviously, the whole Bush administration took over in January, and then 8 months later, one of the most momentous days in American history happened, of course, Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. You tell us where you were that day and what happened to Larry Thompson that day.
That's certainly a day that I will never, ever forget. John was traveling out of he was away from D.C. on that day. So I am now the Attorney General, acting Attorney General when John is out of the city. I was having a meeting with the U.S. Attorney from Rhode Island, for the District of Rhode Island. There was a big organized crime case that she was working on and developing, and she was going to brief me about this case. As Deputy Attorney General, all of the U.S. attorneys report up to you, and then you report to the Attorney General. And I saw the second plane hit the building, hit the World Trade Center tower. And then almost immediately, I get a call from Condi Rice. She knew that John was out of the city, and she said to me, "You need to stay put, and some United States Marshals will come and escort you to the proper place."
Were you at Main Justice?
I was at Main Justice.
Okay.
But I had to make several decisions because what do you do? And I made the decision that it was obviously a terrorist attack. And immediately after I made the decision, it was sort of controversial within the building, but I made the decision to evacuate Main Justice.
Hmm.
I didn't know what was happening. I learned later that the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania was headed for the Capitol, and that plane would have gone straight over the Department of Justice building on its way to the Capitol. So who knows what could have happened. But clearly, looking back, that was the right decision. And then the marshals came into my office, and they really did not escort me. They basically arrested me and took me away from the building and took me to the undisclosed location where there were people that I recognized, senators and congressmen and Supreme Court justices, cabinet officials, and a good deal of our established government, good deal of the officials were transported to the undisclosed location, and some remained in the city, in the district. But it was a memorable experience, and really from a personal standpoint, I have two sons. One son at the time was attending New York University Law School, and he had talked to me over the weekend about an interview he had with a law firm in the World Trade Center towers. And I'm thinking, is my son Larry, was he there?
Mm.
And then my son Gary was working with a firm, a medical firm that was headquartered in downtown New York City. So both of my sons were in New York City at this time. One of them was scheduled for an interview at the World Trade Center towers. And I didn't know when that interview was going to happen, but it was scheduled. It never happened. It was scheduled for September 12th and not September 11th.
Wow.
Early in the morning, by the way, of September 12th.
Uh-huh. Wow. One of the things that came out of that, Larry, was that, of course, the American intelligence community, of which you were part, began to put pieces together to see how did this happen and what did we know about it beforehand. And you were part of that. And I've heard you speak of this. Again, you've served on our board at the Georgia Historical Society, so you and I have a relationship. I've heard you speak about this, that you were part of that, and you questioned yourself. What did I miss something I should have seen? Did I fail to connect dots?
That as I say in the book and reflect on it, that experience, serving our country as Deputy Attorney General during 9/11 was one of the most searing thing that I've had to do in my career. And I learned a lot. To your question, for lots of reasons that were appropriately valid. We had a wall between intelligence information and law enforcement information because some of the intelligence information had been misused in the law enforcement context, and we wanted to avoid that. So, for example, the wiretaps that the FBI did of Dr. King were illegal, but they were based upon an intelligence finding that should have never been applied to Dr. King in his capacity as a civilian. He was not an agent of a foreign country. So we were using the intelligence information to circumvent the protections that you and I have as citizens. If the government wants to conduct electronic surveillance of our home or get wiretaps of our phone conversation, it should do so through lawful processes and do so through getting a judicial warrant. The government didn't do that. So there had been this wall developing between intelligence and law enforcement. I had people on my staff who came to me and said, "This is not working, Larry. We need to deal with, have more information sharing between intelligence and law enforcement agents in the FBI and with within the Department of Justice. I couldn't do anything about the CIA. That was outside of my jurisdiction, but certainly the FBI and the prosecutors in the Department of Justice was within my jurisdiction. And so in August, I wrote a memo to all appropriate Department of Justice personnel that basically we should do more information sharing. And if there was information that came up on the intelligence side of the wall that indicated that there was going to be a violation of criminal laws in our country, that information should be disclosed to the law enforcement agents and to prosecutors in the Department of Justice. At the time, I'd reviewed this with John Ashcroft, but at the time it was quite controversial. And the judge of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court called me and legitimately, as he should have, questioned me why we were sort of lowering the wall. And this was, I remind you, this was in August of 2001. And it obviously did not work. It was too little, too late. And so after 9/11, we completely took down the wall. And there's really no wall today. And there are appropriate safeguards, but there's really no formal wall like there was before then. And 3,000 souls perished. And it really was something that I'd never experienced. I really had to deal with it from a personal standpoint. And as you know, you indicated I've talked about this, and I'll just briefly dwell on it here because I've given several talks about my book since it was published. Certainly over 30 talks. And this point about what happened to me, really, I've been surprised, Stan, about how it resonates with people because I got sick. I was depressed. I went to see a therapist. She was very good. But I was sick. And the realization that you can have mental health issues is something that I think all of us sometimes try to hide. We have physical health issues, and no one tries to hide those. But the mental health issues, people try to hide. But when I talk about this and what happened to me on a personal level, after every talk, I get so many individuals coming up to me and thanking me for talking about this openly and basically saying we've had similar problems in our family, either myself or my spouse or my child or neighbor. And it's been heartening. Well, quite frankly, it's been sort of cathartic for me to talk about this. I had never talked about it until I wrote the book, but it really has been cathartic that I think I'm having, my talks and what I wrote in the book, plays a small part in helping Americans to understand we have to get rid of the old taboos on mental health issues. It's something we need to recognize and deal with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you, in the days or weeks or months after, like President Bush, did you visit Ground Zero?
I did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult
Mm-hmm.
for me I've had one visit since I was in government, only one. It's very difficult for me to go down there.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine. Um, we, boy, we've got so much ground left to cover in your career, but you left public service, and I think it was after 2 years. Is that correct? Was it 2003 when you went to PepsiCo?
I went to PepsiCo in 2004.
2004, and you began Counsel. Yeah.
For two reasons. I took a little hiatus.
Mm-hmm.
I was sick.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to sort of make sure I was able to work again.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to work again. And that's one reason I didn't take a job immediately after I left government, and
Hmm.
because President Bush had asked me to be in charge of the corporate fraud task force
Hmm.
following the collapse of Enron and WorldCom and the corporate fraud epidemic that occurred
Hmm.
after the Enron collapse. I was dealing with lawyers representing all kinds of businesses, and I didn't want to even give a hint of impropriety about interviewing for a job with a law firm or corporation while I was at the Department of Justice.
Hmm.
And so I just made a decision that I'm not going to look for a job uh, in the business world or in the legal world until I leave. And so I left, and I took a position at a think tank, the Brookings Institution, part time, and I took a position at the University of Georgia Law School part time, teaching, and both were very rewarding positions. And I especially enjoyed teaching uh,
Hmm.
at the University of Georgia Law School. It was terrific. It was tough. You think about having to I taught two classes. I never taught those classes before. I had to compile the notes in one semester after I came back to
Hmm.
Georgia from Washington. It was a tough experience, but
Yeah.
I got through it, and it was a lot of fun.
I want to talk briefly in just a minute about the service in corporate law. But I want to jump ahead a little bit before we
Oh,
leave the George W. Bush administration, because your name came up while he was president as a possible nominee to the highest bench, to the Supreme Court. It did not ultimately happen, but you got a phone call that basically said, "Can we put your name forward?" And you said yes. And then uh, I think that was the seat that Samuel Alito got, if I'm not mistaken. But you found out later
yes,
uh, why you didn't get that. Can
yes,
you tell that story?
yeah. That was in where I talk about a number of situations. What if?
Yeah.
I will also tell another. Not as I guess I'll relate another story to you that was kind of memorable in relation to that, because at the time this was following Justice O'Connor's retirement,
Mm-hmm.
and the president had nominated Harriet Miers to
Mm-hmm.
be on the court, and she ran into some opposition and withdrew, and so several people following her withdrawal were talking about different people, and I get a call from Senator Edward Kennedy uh, I was still the general counsel at PepsiCo, and I get a call from Senator Kennedy who said, "Mr. Thompson and his New England brogue, a number of us have been talking, and we think you should be on the Supreme Court. We think you're the best person." And I translated that immediately to, "We think you're the best Republican, not the best."
Right. 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 Yeah.
And so we talked, and then he said, which I thought was very interesting, "Do you want me to condemn you or praise you?" And I said, I didn't know how to react to that. And I immediately said, "Well, Senator, if you want me to be on the Supreme Court, you'd better condemn me." And so a week or two later, there was a scathing quote in the Washington Post from Senator Edward Kennedy about how unqualified I would be to be on the Supreme Court. This is the ways of Washington. But I'd gotten a call from Josh Bolton, who was the chief of staff to President Bush,
Mm-hmm.
sort of asking me to um, would I consider being invited to the White House, and if I'm invited to the White House, would I accept an offer from the president? Because they didn't want the president to invite you and you then turn him down. And so we talked about that. I called um, Josh back and said, "I'm ready to come over to the White House." This is the kind of position that you just couldn't say no to. Um, the call never came.
Mm.
And I didn't know what happened. And then several years later, uh, um, Jan Crawford Greenberg wrote a book about the Supreme Court. And there, I'm reading her book, and are 2 pages discussing my situation. And what had happened was that, and I'm now Stan, the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the first Trump administration. Oh, Alex Azar. At the time, Alex Azar had heard that President Bush liked me and that I was one of the ones that was being considered for nomination, along with Michael Ludig and some other people. And there was a dinner held in Washington at the Capitol Grill. I believe that's in the book. And that everybody basically said, Larry's a nice guy. He's friends with Justice Thomas. He's a good guy, but we don't think he really is on solid philosophical grounds. They expressly stated that they thought I might tilt left, like Justice Kennedy. I translated that to mean he might be an impartial person going on the Supreme Court. And heaven help us if we ever appoint an impartial person to a judicial position. Mm-hmm. And in any event, that explained to me why the call never came. And the person that was selected was Samuel Alito.
who never even came close to being Justice Kennedy in his moderation, did
exactly.
he? Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah. What a great story that is. Were you, you mentioned Robert Jackson, of course, who was one of the great justices. Were you disappointed that this opportunity for this lifetime appointment on what is the third equal branch of government?
Yes.
Were you disappointed?
Well, I didn't think about it at the time, Stan. It was nothing that was ever guaranteed.
Sure.
And I just sort of, I write about this because these what if situations, my life, I've been very lucky. My life has proceeded. After that, I had a very interesting and rewarding and satisfying time at PepsiCo. And then I retired from PepsiCo and within a year got a very interesting and challenging and satisfying assignment from the U.S. Department of Justice to be the independent monitor of one of the world's largest corporations. So things worked out. So I really can't say that I'm disappointed. However, in the context of how our country has evolved from a political standpoint, it's critical. I mean, it's important that we respect the Supreme Court because there have been challenges to the co-equal system that the founders set up of the different branches as checks and balances on each other. And so today, I think the Supreme Court is more important than ever as the executive branch, as it always does, strives to assume more power. And as the legislative branch, surprisingly, has retreated from its role in the checks and balances system. So from that standpoint, I respect the very important role that the Supreme Court plays, and probably more important than it has in my adult lifetime.
Mm-hmm. And in some ways, it would seem to me just to even be in the conversation for a position there has got to be, I guess, an honor in some ways, just to know that your name was put into the conversation. Because that doesn't happen to every lawyer, does it?
Not to feign have false immodesty, but you talked to me early on in our conversation about my background, and I sometimes just think to myself, I'm literally a poor boy from Hannibal, Missouri, and just to do the just to be lucky enough to have done the things that I've done and to work with the people with whom I've worked, I feel very fortunate.
I want to first of all, Larry, be mindful of your time. We have talked for an hour already, but
If we need to continue, I'm really happy to do it. At another time, if you
well,
know.
there's two other things I want to ask you about,
Okay,
really, and you can make you can make these as concise as you want or not, but uh,
I'm used to being paid by the word. So,
yeah, no, that's all right. I mean, this is great. So I want to talk to you about your work with Volkswagen. This is what you just alluded to. And if you will, sort of sum up, because I think the work with PepsiCo is fascinating. For me personally, reading about what Volkswagen had done, what they had been accused of, and then as you became involved with sort of drilling down into corporate culture, how you describe the whole thing about what happened and how at so many levels at Volkswagen this idea of getting away with something had permeated. But for the readers, I would say, for our listeners who would read your book, there's a fascinating discussion that you have about what corporations do, how they came about. Is their primary job to make money for other shareholders, or is it to somehow also do the right thing, even if that conflicts with making money? So that's a fascinating discussion that you have, and that's where you talk about Pepsi. Is their job to sell, as you put it, sugary drinks around the world, or to become more health conscious? And so that was a fascinating conversation and how you played a part in that. And you can talk about that if you want to, but also I wanted you to talk about just briefly about what happened at Volkswagen and how you were able to kind of infiltrate what was pretty rotten corporate culture.
yes. If I can, I'll talk a little bit about both
Yeah,
because
please.
you'd asked me about Professor Vining.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was fortunate enough to get the job at PepsiCo as the general counsel, the chief legal officer of this worldwide company.
Mm-hmm.
And be, because of the nature of the job, it sort of became a righteous cause for me because Pepsi was going, like the other beverage companies and consumer products company, Pepsi was going through some difficult times with the health issues concerned with sugar sweetened beverages and restrictions that a lot of people were trying to impose on these products. And so it was an interesting time in my career. And it's one of the things that I sort of focused on, from my time at Michigan with Joe Vining, that corporations really need to focus on two dimensions to be successful. One is the time frame. You're going to have policies and procedures. Over what time frame are you looking? Are you looking for simply short term, or are you looking for long term? What do your shareholders want you to do? Are your shareholders investing in you for the short term or the long term? The other dimension that corporations need to look at are their constituents. Obviously, for a public corporation, your very important constituent are the shareholders. But are there other constituents? And what about your employees? What about your suppliers? What about the consumers of your products? So these are the things that corporations who are going to be successful need to look at. And I cite in my book a 1932 Harvard Law Review article by E.M. Dodd, which is as true today as you and I are talking as it was in 1932. And he said, if corporations don't understand these two dimensions, and especially do not understand who their constituents are, and do not serve their constituents well, then you're going to get government intervention, which in almost all instances will be much more harsh than if the corporation had done the right thing. So when you look at ethics, what happens is the people at the top of the corporation forget this. They don't understand the long term, the importance of governing the corporation at the long term. They don't understand one of their important constituencies, who might be their consumers who are hurt by bad decisions, or the employees. And so what happened at Volkswagen, and they have admitted this in news articles, that there was a rotten culture. There was a culture of just short-term performance, a culture where the company ruled by fear. They did not encourage employees to speak up and express their concerns about corporate decisions. And so, which led to this massive cheating scandal in which the company pled guilty, and the U.S. Department of Justice appointed me as the independent compliance monitor to see if Volkswagen had put into systems and processes that would lead to something like this not happening again. And so it really begins, Stan, at the tone at the top. What are you going to stress? Are you going to stress just profits? Are you going to stress profits, but also doing things the right way? Are you going to look at ethical outcomes only, or just look at business outcomes? And Volkswagen had basically lost its way. And so one of the things that we did was go through a whole series of reviewing what the company could do on a going forward basis to make certain that it had the right tone at the top, that it had right systems in place where something like this would never happen again. So, I talk about ethics versus something that's legal.
Mm-hmm.
And I use an example from my time at PepsiCo about something could be legal, but maybe not be the right thing to do from an ethical standpoint. So one of the products that PepsiCo made at the time I was there is a product called Cracker Jacks. It's a confectionery product that we call it Cracker Jacks in the United States, but it's called different things in other parts of the world. And one of the hallmarks of that product, as we all may remember, is the little toy in the box. Well, unfortunately, that toy presented safety hazards. And in parts of the world, like the United States, Canada, Western Europe, regulations were passed that prohibited manufacturers of confectionery products like Cracker Jacks from putting a toy in the box, because the kids got a hold of the toy and sometimes they would choke on the toy. In other parts of the world, it was perfectly legal to put the toy in the box. Brazil, Mexico, China. And then you are faced with a value decision. Is the health of a child in Canada more important than the health of a child in Brazil? And if you manufacture products and sell products in Canada and in Brazil, what do you do as a corporation? So then you have to go beyond strict legality, but to values. What are your values? And if one of your values is we're going to make and sell safe products, not necessarily legal products where we can maximize profits for the corporation, then your value would lead you to take the toy out of your products all over the world, not just in jurisdictions where it's legal. So these are the kind of things that we had to go through with Volkswagen. Volkswagen was committed to getting past this huge disaster. And one of the things that we were satisfied with were all the processes that Volkswagen put into place where employees could speak up in an anonymous basis and without fear of retaliation and express their concerns about things that were happening that could lead to unsafe products or violations of rules and regulations or laws.
Oh, the last point I want you to talk about, Larry, is what you talked about toward the end of your book. You said if we lawyers are to truly play a constructive role in society as we serve our clients, we should strive to be wise and understand, even enjoy, and you put in all caps, life. Life. What do you mean by that, and how did that play out in your own?
Well, you are more than just a historian, Stan, and I'd like to think that I'm more than just a lawyer. And I think we become best in our chosen professions if we are more complete human beings. And so, one of the things that Brenda and I have been fortunate enough to do was to develop an interest in art primarily by African American artists, not totally, and collect that art as really, quite frankly, a reflection of some of the things that have happened in our country. So primarily the art that we collect are by either under recognized or even unknown, but trained African American artists whose art will never be exposed but for through our collection. And our collection has reached a point where, we have some influence over exhibits. If museums want to borrow pieces from our collection, we can direct them to artists who they've never heard of. And I'm very pleased with that. And so we recently had, well, let me back up. We recently gifted 176 pieces to the country through the National Gallery of Art. And the National Gallery had an exhibit this past summer of about 80 of those pieces in DC. And it gave me enormous satisfaction that some of those artists would never, ever, even though they were fine artists, got to the National Gallery of Art, but for the work that we did. Mr. Alonzo Davis is one who I went to meet in the latter part of his life, and he died before the show. But the National Gallery put one of his pieces in the exhibit, and it really was a success. And I in the book, I talk about Mr. Hayes, Vertus Hayes, who was a WPA artist, and Brenda and I got to meet him toward the end of his life. He was a terrific artist. He did the Harlem Hospital murals during the WPA period. And under some controversy because he was painting Negroes in a very positive, affirmative way, and not in a subservient way. And some of the his WPA bosses thought that might be controversial. And at some point, Mr. Hayes said that if my art ever becomes known, because it wasn't known at the time, if my art ever becomes known, it will be through your collection, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Well, recently, we gifted 3 pieces to the Detroit Institute of Arts, and they were reimagining the way they were handling their collection of African American artists, and they did some very creative ways and techniques to introduce their African American collection to the larger museum. And a review of the efforts of the Detroit Institute of Art was published in the Wall Street Journal, a national newspaper, and there was an image of Mr. Hayes's piece in the Wall Street Journal. And that just happened a couple of months ago. So
wow,
we're very pleased.
As well, you should be. It's a terrific legacy. Larry, as we sit here, we're approaching July 4th, 2026, 250th anniversary of our country. One of the themes that the Georgia Historical Society has been exploring this year in our festival is the rule of law. As we approach this momentous moment in our history without really talking, we haven't talked about and really don't need to talk about what is happening right now in our country, but how would you sum up as a person who not only has written a memoir with the subtitle Looking Back on a Life of Service to the Law, how important is the rule of law to the preservation of this republic?
Well, I want to thank you, Stan, and your colleagues at the Georgia Historical Society for what you're doing and making history not only available to the citizens of Georgia and to our country, but bringing about a way that history can be used so that we understand it and understand how we can make our country better and stronger. And I think if to the extent in my lifetime we've had advances in society and inequities have been righted, it's because we understand history and we understand why it's important for us to continually move toward a better society through our understanding of history. So thank you. Now, the rule of law is so important. And I want to just sort of talk to you about going back to my most important mentor, Griffin Bell. Judge Bell often quoted to me a Supreme Court case, I think it's from the 30s, Sutherland versus United States. And he said that the government always wins when justice is done. And I think we need to understand the importance of a fair criminal justice system, a fair justice system, respect for the law. I'm a lawyer. We lawyers should always have respect for the law. We should always deal with the judge in a candid way, in candor. You have an obligation to not only cite authority that favors your side, but if there's a case that is directly opposite of what you're trying to do, you have an ethical obligation to cite that case and then try to distinguish it. We may be getting away from that. I think it's important that the Department of Justice proceed with its investigations without improper influence, without political influence, without targeting individuals. Robert Jackson said that a prosecutor is really, in a way, one of the most important individuals because he or she can affect your reputation and your well-being without ever convicting you. He can just leak to the world that an individual who has been politically targeted or targeted for some other improper purpose is under investigation. So I think we need to continue those principles. I think we need to, as you say, the rule of law, stress the fair administration from justice, respect court decisions. And if I may end on not a political note, but it's a positive note, and that is we just had the recent tariff decision from the United States Supreme Court. And a number of people have criticized the president's response to that and his name calling of the judges and so forth. And while I think that was unnecessary, and I am concerned about it from the standpoint of how it might affect the justice's security issues, the one thing that I, as a lawyer, was buoyed about in that decision, and including the president's reaction, was that in that tirade that the president experienced, he never once said, "I'm not going to obey the Supreme Court." And think about that. And so as long as our country is headed toward the path that we're going to respect the fair administration of justice, I think that's important.
That is a great way to end. Larry Thompson, thank you for your long life of service to the law, to our country, to helping us understand how important it is in propping up and continuing this great republic. Thank you for your service to the Georgia Historical Society and the people of Georgia. Proud to call you a friend. Thank you for coming on here and talking to me.
My honor, Stan. You do a great job. I don't know how you're going to edit my ramblings. But
I'm not. I'm going to let you talk because it's been great. Thank you, Larry.
Okay, Stan.
My thanks to Larry Thompson for joining me on this podcast. You can find out more about his book at disruptionbooks.com. The hardest working producer and engineer in show business, the producer of this podcast, as well as the czar of our Tallahassee office, is our very own and indispensable Brendan Cannonball Krellin. Learn everything about the Georgia Historical Society at georgiahistory.com and the Georgia History Festival and this year's theme at georgiahistoryfestival.org. If you're a fan of Today in Georgia History, and who isn't, check it out at the completely redesigned website at todayingeorgiahistory.org, and you can see it and hear it, currently airing twice a day on TV and radio on Georgia Public Broadcasting. You can find this podcast anywhere you can find podcasts, including YouTube and YouTube Music. You can also find Off the Beaten Path on the podcast app on your phone, and I would ask you to please leave a review on the Apple Podcast app, which would be most helpful and appreciated. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow, subscribe, and share with a friend, and drop me a line at sdeaton@georgiahistory.com. Be sure and like Off the Beaten Path on Facebook as well. You can also treat yourself to every podcast, every blog, and every video entitled Dispatches from Off the Beaten Path at deatonpath.georgiahistory.com. Stay safe, stay strong. I'm Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society. As always, thank you for listening.